is a place in Russia that the Russian government spent most of the 20th century hiding from its own citizens. Not from foreign enemies, from Russians. A peninsula nearly twice the size of Japan, jutting into the North Pacific between the Sea of Okhotsk and the Bering Sea, sealed by military decree for decades. Accessible only with a special permit, controlled by a military zone designation that kept its landscapes, its peoples, and its extraordinary geology invisible to almost everyone on Earth. It contains the largest concentration of active volcanoes in the Northern Hemisphere. It holds geysers that rival Yellowstone in scale and exceed it in number. Its rivers run so thick with wild salmon in late summer that brown bears, the largest population of brown bears on Earth, wade in to fish with their hands, catching 4 and 5 fish in a single hour in water so clean you could drink it. 29 active volcanoes, a Valley of Geysers discovered by a Soviet scientist in 1941 and classified secret immediately after. A wilderness larger than California that has never had a road connecting it to the Russian mainland. This is not the Russia of Moscow's onion domes and Red Square processions. It is not the Russia of the news cycle, or the geopolitical headlines, or the Cold War imagination. This is the Russia that exists 8 time zones east of Moscow. A Russia so remote that its own capital treats it more like a colony than a corner of the country. So wild that the volcanoes that built it are still building it today. So untouched that the indigenous peoples who have lived here for 10,000 years are still conducting salmon ceremonies in rivers that have never been dammed. How does a land this extreme, this beautiful, this geologically alive remain almost entirely unknown, even to the country that claims to own it? That is the question this journey is built to answer. And the answer, by the end, will make you reconsider what the word forbidden actually means and who it has always been designed to protect. The Kronotsky Nature Reserve, established in 1934, covering approximately 1 million hectares on the eastern coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula, home to 26 active volcanoes, more than 160 dormant ones, the world's largest freshwater stellar sea eagle population, and the Valley of Geysers, Dolina Geyserov, the second largest geyser field on Earth and the only one in Eurasia. The valley was discovered in 1941 by the Russian volcanologist Tatyana Ustinova and her guide, Anissifor Krupinin, who followed a river upstream in spring flood and found themselves in a steam-filled canyon where the ground was erupting on a schedule. Ustinova named the largest geyser Velikan, giant. It erupts to a height of 40 meters every 5 to 6 hours and has done so without interruption since she first measured it. She reported the discovery. It was classified immediately. The Cold War was just beginning, and the Soviet military had decided that the Kamchatka Peninsula, with its access to the North Pacific, its submarine base at Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, and its proximity to the American coast of Alaska, would be a closed military zone. The Valley of Geysers became a state secret. Scientists could access it with special clearance. Almost no one else could. For 50 years, one of the most extraordinary geological sites in the Northern Hemisphere existed in a classified document, while Yellowstone became a global symbol of American wilderness. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The military zone designation was eventually lifted. In 1996, Kamchatka's volcanic system was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The volcanoes of Kamchatka, encompassing approximately 3 million hectares, the largest protected volcanic landscape in the world. Today, the Valley of Geysers is accessible by helicopter only. There are no roads. The nearest town is Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, a city of 170,000 people. the largest city on Earth that cannot be reached by road from any other city. Think about that for a moment. 170,000 people, the size of a mid-sized European city, and no road connecting it to anything. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky is connected to the wider world by air and sea alone. Its supply lines run through the North Pacific. In winter, when the sea freezes and flights are limited, the city's logistics become what they have always been in this part of the world: a matter of planning, patience, and a very high tolerance for isolation. You arrive in the valley by helicopter at dawn. The rotors slow and stop, and the sound that fills the space left by the engine is steam, a continuous hiss and rush from 100 vents in the valley floor, punctuated by the deep percussion of Velikan, sending its column 40 meters skyward. The air smells of sulfur and cold water and volcanic mineral in a combination that has no equivalent anywhere you have been before. The ground beneath your feet is warm. The stream running through the valley is turquoise, the color of volcanic mineral dissolution, a color that does not exist in any non-volcanic river. It smells of the inside of the earth. But what moves beneath this landscape? In the rock record, in the sediment cores, in the stories of the people who lived here before any Soviet decree decided this place belonged to the state, is older and stranger than any geyser. Before the military zone, before the Soviet collective farms, before the Cossack conquest of Kamchatka in the 17th century, before any of it, the Itelmen. The Itelmen people are the indigenous inhabitants of the Kamchatka Peninsula, one of the oldest continuously inhabited territories in northeastern Asia, with an archaeological record of human presence extending back at least 10,000 years. They call themselves Itelmen, meaning the people who exist here, a name that carries, in its simplicity, an entire philosophy of belonging. Their civilization was built on the salmon. Kamchatka's rivers run the largest wild Pacific salmon runs remaining on Earth. 6 species, Chinook, sockeye, coho, pink, chum, and cherry salmon, migrate annually from the North Pacific into the peninsula's river systems in numbers that were, before any human intervention, essentially uncountable. Estimates based on pre-contact ecological records suggest runs of hundreds of millions of fish per year. Even today, after a century of commercial fishing pressure, Kamchatka's rivers produce runs that dwarf anything remaining in North America or Japan. The Itelmen understood the salmon not as a resource, but as a gift that required ceremony. Their annual salmon festival, Alkalalalale, was held at the start of the salmon run, and its function was not celebration, in the modern sense, but reciprocal obligation, a formal acknowledgement to the salmon and to the spirit of the river that the people understood what they were receiving and intended to take only what the river could sustain. The ceremony involved specific dances, specific songs, and the ritual cleansing of fishing equipment, not as superstition, but as a codified system of ecological restraint embedded in religious practice. Take only what you need. Thank what you take. Ensure the river continues to give. This system worked. For 10,000 years, it worked. Then the Cossacks arrived. The Russian conquest of Kamchatka, beginning in the 1690s under explorer Vladimir Atlasov, was among the most violent colonial episodes in Siberian history. The Itelmen, who had no tradition of territorial warfare and who resisted the imposition of the yasak, the fur tribute demanded by Russian imperial agents, were subjected to punitive expeditions that decimated the population. By 1800, the Itelmen population had fallen from an estimated 12 to 15,000 at first contact to fewer than 3,000. The Soviet period brought collective farming, enforced sedentarization, boarding schools where children were separated from their families and forbidden from speaking the Itelmen language, and the systematic dismantling of ceremonial life. Natalia Takasami is an Itelmen elder born in Kovrin, a small Itelmen village on the western coast of Kamchatka, in 1958. She grew up in the Soviet boarding school system. She was forbidden to speak Itelmen. She watched the ceremony disappear from her community the way languages disappear, through the accumulated effect of 1,000 small prohibitions, each too small to fight, together sufficient to silence a world. In the 1990s, following the Soviet collapse, she began teaching the Itelmen language in Kovrin. She had to reconstruct it partly from her own memory, partly from recordings made by Soviet ethnographers in the 1960s, and partly from the few remaining fluent speakers, elders then in their 70s and 80s who had carried the language internally for decades, rather than lose it entirely. Natalia Takasami is now one of the primary reasons the Itelmen language has not gone extinct. She does not describe what she is doing as heroic. She describes it as returning a debt. The language was always there, she told a researcher from the Russian Academy of Sciences in 2018. We just stopped speaking it out loud for a while. A people the empire tried to silence, in the place the empire tried to hide, both still speaking. That is a truth this peninsula has been carrying for 10,000 years without asking permission. From the Itelmen villages on the western coast, the land rises and keeps rising. The Kamchatka Peninsula is one of the most volcanically active places on the surface of the Earth. It sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, specifically at the junction of the Pacific Plate subducting beneath the North American and Eurasian plates, generating the magmatic pressure that has been building this landscape for the past 60 million years and continues building it today. 29 active volcanoes, 160 identified volcanic structures in various states of dormancy. The peninsula experiences between 200 and 300 earthquakes of measurable magnitude every year. The ground here is not metaphorically alive. It is literally, measurably, in the process of being made. Kluchevskaya Sopka is the tallest active volcano in Eurasia. It rises 4,750 meters from the surrounding plain, a near-perfect cone of ice and rock and periodic ash that has been erupting, on average, once every 5 years, for the entirety of recorded human habitation of the peninsula. The Itelmen watched it erupt. The Cossacks watched it erupt. The Soviet military watched it erupt. It erupts still. Standing at its base in early autumn, the air temperature is -6 degrees Celsius. The wind comes off the North Pacific at 35 kilometers per hour and carries ice crystals that score exposed skin in minutes. The sky is a deep, painful blue, and the volcano's summit is veiled in its own micro-weather system, a permanent cloud formation generated by the heat differential between the crater and the atmosphere, from which lightning occasionally fires downward into the ice. To walk toward it is to walk toward something that exists on a different temporal scale than anything human. The lava flows on Kluchevskaya's flanks were deposited in eruptions spread across centuries. The oldest surface flows visible from the approach trail were laid down approximately 300 years ago. The youngest, a dark, jagged, still sharp field of basalt, dates to 2019. You can walk from 1720 to 2019 in 40 steps, reading the difference in weathering and vegetation colonization on rock surfaces that the volcano made at intervals your own history fills. In August 1975, a Soviet volcanologist named Genrikh Steinberg was on Kluchevskaya's upper slopes conducting gas measurements when the volcano entered an unexpected eruption phase. He had 90 seconds. He ran down 300 meters of ice-covered slope, fell twice, and survived. His measurements, taken in the final minutes before the eruption, remain the closest direct chemical sampling of Kluchevskaya's eruptive phase for 20 years. He returned the following summer to finish the experiment. This is what science looks like in Kamchatka. Not because researchers here are reckless, because the object of study does not wait for convenient conditions, and the people who have built their lives in this landscape have made a specific accommodation with its violence. Respect it, understand it as best you can, and continue. But what lives in the rock above the lava flows, in the fossil record and the sediment cores of the peninsula's ancient lakes, is not just the story of the Earth. It is the story of a migration that rewrite the history of two continents. 20,000 years ago, sea levels were lower, not slightly lower, 120 meters lower. The shallow continental shelf between what is now the Chukotka Peninsula of Russia and the state of Alaska was exposed. A vast, flat plain of grassland and tundra, 600 miles wide, inhabited by woolly mammoths, steppe bison, cave lions, and human beings. Beringia. It was not a bridge in the sense of a narrow passage. It was a continent, a connected landmass that scientists now call the Mammoth Steppe, stretching from Siberia through Beringia into Alaska and southward into the Americas. For thousands of years, it was one of the most densely inhabited landscapes in the northern world. Kamchatka was on its eastern edge. The people who became the first nations of North and South America walked through the landscape that is now the Bering Sea between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago. The precise timeline is still debated. Archaeological sites in the Americas continue to push the date back, and genetic studies of modern indigenous American populations continue to refine the picture of when, in how many waves, and from exactly which population groups the migration occurred. But the Kamchatka Peninsula and the Chukotka coast that connects it northward toward the Bering Strait were part of the corridor. The ancestors of the Cherokee, of the Maya, of the Inca, of every indigenous American civilization that built cities, developed writing systems, cultivated crops, observed the stars, and made art that still exists. They walked through the landscape that is now Kamchatka, or through terrain geologically and ecologically continuous with it, on their way to building half the world. In 2020, researchers from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published a genomic study of ancient Siberian populations that identified a previously unknown ancestral population, which they designated Ancient Paleo-Siberians, as the source population for a major wave of migration into the Americas approximately 20,000 years ago. The study traced the genetic lineage of this population to the Kolyak and Itelmen peoples of the Kamchatka region. The Itelmen, the people the Cossacks tried to exterminate, the people whose language Natalia Takasami is teaching in a village on the western coast, carry in their genome a direct genetic connection to the populations that peopled the Americas. The people the Russian Empire tried to erase are the cousins of the peoples the American Empire tried to erase. The specific cruelty of this parallel: two colonial projects on opposite sides of the Pacific, directed at populations whose deepest family connection the colonizers never knew they were severing, is a mystery the Far East has been holding in its rock and its genes and its surviving ceremonies, waiting for someone to read it. We will return to that thread. But the Far East holds one more secret, one that only came to light in the past 20 years, and that turned the global scientific community's understanding of Russian geography completely upside down. Everything we have discussed belongs to Kamchatka, to the North Pacific, to volcanoes and salmon and the deep time of a migration that made the Americas. Now, the journey turns south, 6,000 kilometers south, to a corner of Russia that looks nothing like Kamchatka, sounds nothing like Siberia, and is almost never mentioned in the same conversation as either. Primorsky Krai, the maritime territory, a sliver of Russian land pressed between China to the west, North Korea to the south, and the Sea of Japan to the east. Its southern tip, the Vladivostok region, sits at the same latitude as northern Spain. The climate is temperate. The winters are cold, but not Siberian. The summers are warm and humid and green in a way that no image labeled Russia has ever prepared you for. The forests of Primorsky Krai contain Korean pine, Mongolian oak, Manchurian walnut, and Amur linden, a temperate broadleaf forest of extraordinary biodiversity, more closely related ecologically to the forests of northern Japan and northeastern China than to anything in European Russia. And inside those forests lives the most endangered large cat on Earth, the Amur leopard, Panthera pardus orientalis, a subspecies of leopard uniquely adapted to cold temperate forest, thick-coated, long-legged, capable of operating in temperatures of minus 30 degrees Celsius, hunting deer and roe deer across the snow-covered valleys of the land of the Leopard National Park. In 2007, the global wild population of the Amur leopard was estimated at 30 individuals. 30, not 300, not 3,000. 30 animals alive on Earth in a territory of approximately 7,000 square kilometers in southwestern Primorsky Krai, representing the last viable wild population of the subspecies. At 30 individuals, a population has almost no genetic resilience. One disease outbreak, one bad winter, one sustained increase in poaching pressure. Any of these can end a lineage that evolved over millions of years. What happened next does not happen very often in conservation. The Amur leopard came back. A combination of forces, the establishment of the land of the Leopard National Park in 2012, covering 360,000 hectares of the leopard's core territory, an intensive camera trap monitoring program run by the Wildlife Conservation Society in partnership with Russian wildlife authorities, and a community engagement program with the farming and hunting communities whose land bordered the park, produced over 15 years, a result that most conservation biologists had not allowed themselves to expect. By 2024, the estimated wild Amur leopard population had increased to approximately 120 individuals, 120 from 30, in 15 years. The man most directly responsible for the monitoring program and for persuading the Russian government at the height of its skepticism toward international scientific organizations to accept international conservation partnership is a Russian wildlife biologist named Viktor Lukharevsky, who spent 30 years in the Primorsky forests tracking leopard sign before a camera trap was available to confirm what he already knew, that the leopard was surviving barely in the deep forest shadows that official surveys had classified as empty. He trusted his own reading of the land before the instruments confirmed it. That kind of trust, in a specific, hard-won, patient knowledge of a place, is not a Russian quality or a conservation quality. It is the quality the Far East seems to produce in everyone who spends enough time paying attention to it. The Russian Far East is emptying, not in the way places empty when they are poor and forgotten, in a more specific and more politically shaped way, a deliberate demographic collapse driven by the economics of post-Soviet transition, the gravitational pull of Moscow, and a labor market that has, for 30 years, offered young people born in Vladivostok or Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky better futures somewhere else. In 1991, the Russian Far East Federal District had a population of approximately 8 million people. By 2023, that number had fallen below 6 million, a loss of more than 2 million people in 30 years. a demographic contraction that has depopulated entire towns, closed schools in communities that once had dozens of children, and hollowed out the economic and social infrastructure of the world's largest and most resource-rich sub-national region. The city of Magadan, established as the administrative center of the Kolyma Gulag system, built literally by the labor of political prisoners, and carrying in its street grid and its official buildings the architectural memory of one of the most horrific penal systems in human history, had a population of 150,000 in 1990. Today, it is approximately 85,000 and declining. The people leaving are disproportionately young and educated. The people staying are older, more rural, more connected to the land-based economies, fishing, reindeer herding, subsistence hunting, that the Soviet-era industrial economy could not entirely eliminate. The indigenous peoples of the Far East, the Itelmen, the Koryak, the Even, the Ivani, the Nane, the Udege, number collectively fewer than 100,000 people across a territory of 6 million square kilometers. Their languages are classified by UNESCO at various points on the endangered spectrum, from vulnerable to critically endangered. The Itelmen language, the language Natalia Takasami is teaching in Kovran, is spoken fluently by fewer than 80 people. 80, the entirety of a linguistic world, carried by 80 human minds. The Amur tiger, Panthera tigris altaica, the largest cat on Earth, adapted to the same Primorsky Krai forests as the Amur leopard, has a current wild population of approximately 560 individuals, recovering from a low of fewer than 50 in the 1940s. Its recovery is one of the great conservation achievements of the 20th century, built on a Russian anti-poaching program that operated through the chaos of the Soviet collapse with a consistency that defied the institutional disorder of the 1990s. But the tiger's habitat, the Manchurian mixed forest of Primorsky Krai, faces ongoing pressure from logging, agricultural conversion across the Chinese border, and the specific economic desperation of communities where a tiger carcass, illegally sold into the Chinese traditional medicine market, can represent several years of local average income. The leopard is recovering, the tiger is stable, the languages are dying, the cities are emptying. The Far East is holding three things simultaneously: the most dramatic wildlife recovery in post-Soviet history, the most severe demographic collapse in any region of a major country, and a population of indigenous peoples who carry the deepest knowledge of this place in their memories and who are disappearing faster than the cats. Which is why what the last community of traditional Koryak reindeer herders decided to do in the winter of 2022 is the question that the Far East has been building toward for this entire journey. The Koryak people of northern Kamchatka have been herding reindeer for at least 2,000 years, not farming them, not ranching them in enclosed pasture. Herding, moving with the animals across seasonal migration routes that cover hundreds of kilometers, following the lichen pasture from lowland winter grounds to highland summer meadows, reading the weather, the snow condition, the ice on the river crossings, with a knowledge system so specific to this landscape that it cannot be translated into any other context and has never needed to be. The Soviet period imposed collective farms, kolkhozy, on the Koryak herding communities. The traditional migration routes were rationalized, the ceremonial relationships with the herds, specific songs for specific seasons, the ritual of the first reindeer calf, the prayers for safe river crossings, were suppressed as incompatible with scientific socialism. The herds were nationalized. The herders became employees of the state. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the collective farms lost their funding. The herds, which had been maintained at artificial scale by state subsidy, collapsed. between 1990 and 2000, the reindeer population of Kamchatka fell by 60%, from approximately 400,000 animals to fewer than 160,000. Animals were slaughtered for immediate cash when the state stopped paying wages. Infrastructure was abandoned. Hundreds of herders, stripped of both the traditional knowledge networks that had been suppressed and the state structures that had replaced them, simply left. By 2005, the traditional nomadic herding culture of the Koryak was, in most assessments, functionally over. Vasily Yailev was 43 years old in 2005. He had spent his adult life as a herder in the Soviet collective system in the Penjinsky district of northern Kamchatka. When the collective collapsed, he did not leave. He had 300 reindeer, animals he had claimed from the disbanding collective herd, and no legal framework for owning them, no state infrastructure to support their movement, and no market for their meat or hides that did not require a 600-kilometer journey to reach. He stayed with the animals. For 17 years, Vasily ran what amounted to a private herd on routes that his grandfather had walked before the Soviet collective imposed new lines on the land. He relearned, partly from memory, partly from conversations with the oldest Koryak elders he could reach, the seasonal routes that the collective system had bureaucratized into something his grandfather would not have recognized. He taught his son and his daughter the routes, the signs, the songs for the calving season, and the crossing of rivers. In 2019, his herd had grown to approximately 1,100 animals, one of the largest privately held reindeer herds in Kamchatka, in a district where most families had given up the practice entirely. In 2022, the Russian ethnographic organization Itelmen documented his operation as one of 12 surviving examples of continuous nomadic reindeer herding culture in the Russian Far East. The documentation team spent 3 weeks on the migration with him in winter conditions of -40 degrees Celsius. They asked him why he had stayed in 2005 when everyone else was leaving. He said, "The reindeer knew the routes. It seemed wrong to make them forget. Not ideology, not heroism, not cultural preservation as a consciously articulated project, a practical loyalty to the knowledge that the animals already carried, and the recognition that if he walked away, that knowledge walked away with him. The reindeer knew the routes. It seemed wrong to make them forget." That sentence from a Koryak herder in -40 degrees in northern Kamchatka is the most precise description of what it means to be a custodian of a place, rather than a user of it, that this entire journey has produced. So, how does a land this extreme, this beautiful, this geologically alive remain almost entirely unknown, even to the country that claims to own it? Here is the answer the Russian Far East gives in 10,000 years of accumulated evidence, from the Itelmen salmon ceremonies to the Amur leopard camera traps to Vasily Yailev's reindeer herd moving through the snow. The Far East has never belonged to the state that put its flag on it, not to the Tsarist Empire that sent Atlasov in 1697 to collect its fur tribute, not to the Soviet state that classified its geysers as military secrets and dissolved its indigenous ceremonial life into collective agriculture, not to the Russian Federation that watched its population drain westward for 30 years without a strategy sufficient to stop it. It belongs to the people and the animals and the land itself, which have maintained their relationship with each other across every empire and every classification and every decree that told them they were something other than what they were. The Itelmen are still speaking their language, badly, tentatively, reconstructed from recordings and memory, but speaking. The Amur leopard is at 120 individuals and climbing. The geysers erupt on Tatiana Ustinova's original schedule, indifferent to every security classification applied to them. Vasily Yailev's reindeer are following routes that predate every political entity that has ever claimed sovereignty over the ground beneath their feet. The Russian Far East is not forbidden because it is dangerous. It is forbidden because it is too honest. Because a landscape this vast and this ancient and this indifferent to human politics has a way of making every claim of ownership look exactly as temporary as it is. The land doesn't ask your permission, it asks your attention. And it has been waiting for longer than any empire for someone to pay it. The world still holds territories where the official story and the true story have almost nothing in common, where what was classified as forbidden was really just inconvenient for whoever was doing the classifying. If you want to keep finding those places, the ones that survived being hidden, subscribe. There are more of them than the map admits.